So this is definitely something that in the media space I think that everybody here has spoken about before, kind of dealt with somewhat before. And really where we are right now, at least just to kind of set that up on the front of where we are with fake news, it's a lot of different things we could be talking about when we're talking about that. It's not any one thing, no matter what some people that are in charge of the country might say. It is actually a lot of different things. It is sometimes made up content, sometimes it is partially true and then blown up to be something else. It could be done for political purposes, it could be done just to make money, and everything in between on there. So it's been a big topic in the media industry, the advertising industry, the marketing industry. But Eli, I'm going to start with you because I know this is something that when we first spoke about this, you made the very, very good point that this is not something that's new.
We've always had politically driven, media and information. But it's a new experience for us in modern America to have a president who lives in a kind of fake news ecosystem and whose relationship to the truth is different than our most recent presidents of both parties. What's fascinating, I don't actually see this as it's not a social media driven phenomenon, that piece of this. You can go back and look at some of the essays on kind of demagogic politics from the 1970s and see a lot of the same patterns of relationship to the truth, because ultimately, this is a tried and true pattern to have a president who kind of an approach to truth that is about power. So that piece, I think, we're not familiar with here, but we're getting a taste of. But the piece that is new is, how the president is consuming news, and the fact that, we have, in a way, he's sort of the perfect example of someone who is surrounded by information sources that he has specifically chosen, and that only reflect one very particular view of the world.
What social media obviously has done is reinforced. It's put us in the tribes where you are now getting filtered news. I mean, listen, my favorite news source is Twitter, because I can follow the news sources that I want, and I get filtered news. Because I'm in the news business, I'm choosing credible news sources. I'm getting filtered news, but from places, so I'm learning about lots of stuff. But generally, if you're not in the news business, you're going to follow people who conform to your worldview. And of course, that's the underlying problem with our media ecosystem right now, is that it used to be, listen, the democratization of news is both, in some ways, the greatest thing in media in the last 20 years, in some ways the worst. It used to be that 3 news anchors controlled, Walter Cronkite, the most influential man in America. That's probably not healthy that 3 people had that much power. But on the flip side is those 3 people kind of filtered through a system that rewarded accuracy and integrity and knowledge. And now, again, it's, every news outlet for itself. I can't even stand, the idea, this whole mainstream media idea is so farcical in some ways, because the good part about the democratization of media is anybody can be media. There's no such thing as mainstream media. Breitbart was nothing 5 years ago. Breitbart's mainstream media. It was one, Drudge Report is one guy sitting in his pajamas, and it is tremendously powerful. So that it used to be, it's a fair critique 20 years ago, because you needed tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions. You needed to be Tribune Corporation or New York Times. You needed to get into the media game to have a voice of any kind. You needed resources. So it was fair that there's an oligopoly on information. But that's not true anymore. So that's also why the idea of mainstream media, I can't even figure out what that means.
So Craig, where is that coming from your perspective? And what's really driving that?
I learned that a trustworthy press is the immune system of democracy. Not long ago, I was hit by a pretty ugly face news attack, but instead of whining about it, I figure I would find people who are doing a good job of fighting against it, and then I would support those folks with whatever influence I have, contributions, and then advice on keeping them safe. I've just spent a few days in New York, and I'll be back next week, speaking with some of the people doing some of the best work fighting media manipulation and information warfare. The folks at Data and Society, Dana Boyd, they're doing deep analyses of how the social networks spread fake news and also how fake news is used to harass people. Tomorrow, back in San Francisco, I'm talking to the people at Wikipedia dealing with harassment on Wikipedia. Also, in the last couple days, I've been speaking with some of the people running the open brand safety effort. This is a big deal, trying to figure out what sites promote hate, what sites promote fake news. And I spoke with a couple guys, one of whom is someone named Ben Decker. They're doing a really good job setting the stage for fighting fake news. Together, these guys are doing really important work on a historic basis. And so, again, talking about funding, talking about promoting the work, and talking about keeping them safe.
And for full disclosure, Ben Decker works for my company, and I totally did not pay him to say that.
Do you know Ben?
I do.
I know.
employ Ben.
I know.
You touched on something there that I think is kind of a recurring conversation I've seen here, and I've seen a lot of you talk about, is that the role of the platforms in this, whether it's blaming them or in how they can be responding to this.
I don't think we can in any way any longer dismiss how serious this all is. I mean, the scale of what we're learning about what happened in the elections, the ongoing, continuing massive operations that the Russian government has in the United States, we can this feels like science fiction, right? This really couldn't be happening. And I think that's part of the reason we're in the place that we're in now, is that it was too easy to dismiss as being kind of a cost of doing business or the way things, that it wasn't serious. And I think my view is the internet's beginning to get poisoned, right? I mean, that there is a poisoning of the internet and that the internet is actually in danger. If it becomes untrustworthy, right? If it becomes something that you don't really want to go to Facebook anymore, you don't want to put your data in Equifax, right, and all this stuff, we've got a lot of work to do to make the internet healthy again, I think, for it to realize its promise. And the second point I would make is that everyone has a role to play in that. And wherever you are professionally or as a big citizen in your private life, right, this has to become a communal activity, the way that Craig is describing, in order for us to achieve the ends. And I think we have to really hold the platforms in particular accountable for the role that they played and, frankly, for the implausible story that they've been telling about their understanding about what happened. I mean, my view is that I don't know that Facebook and Twitter and Google have been honest with the American people about their understanding of what happened last year or what's ongoing, because I was attacked viciously by bots just last week that were clearly from Russia or from a foreign country after I went on Fox News while in a YouTube clip. So this stuff is continuing. It's not over. It's still ongoing. And I think that if this doesn't get wrestled to the ground, just think about this for a second. If it isn't resolved well here, right, if there isn't some kind of communal, governmental sort of settlement where we all sort of say, okay, Facebook's put improve things and we can trust it again, we have to anticipate that governments all over the world are going to use this as a precursor to get rid of these platforms that they never really wanted to be in their countries in the first place. And you could see a significant change in the business model of some of the biggest global internet brands very rapidly, right? And so I think this is a really serious thing. And I think Sheryl Sandberg's in Washington doing, sort of cleanup work this week. She should have been there 7 months ago, right? And really owned up to what happened. And so I think that it's evolving. But I will tell you this, as somebody who's worked in politics for 25 years, if politicians in the United States or around the world believe that these platforms are being used to unelect them from office, right, then you should expect extraordinary things to happen that could change the business model of the internet itself, right? Because this is not something that they're going to stand by idly and think that the CIA or the FSB could come in and knock them out of power when they weren't paying attention. So I think the stakes in this are significant. And so go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do you square that with the idea? Because really, you talk about Facebook, it really is a platform.
Yep.
And so when we say they, the internet, quote unquote, is really just a bunch of tubes.
Right.
And Facebook. Now the question of if they could tweak algorithms and things like that, but how do you force them to censor news, and do you want that?
I don't have an answer.
Or not, or lack
No,
of news.
and look, the CSO of Facebook said over this weekend that, look, this is a really hard thing, and that we don't know what to do, but we need to talk about it. This needs to be wrestled to the ground together, right? Yeah. This is a societal thing, and I think that Facebook is now, I think, realizing this is a grave threat to their business model, and they're taking very dramatic steps. Good for them. I mean, I think it's great. It's long overdue, but I think the key here is that this has to be felt for the public, I think, to be resolved rapidly, or I think you're going to see other governments all around the world start to take really dramatic steps that are going to be unpleasant for our understanding what the internet is.
I would love it.
So one of the core challenges, specifically with Facebook and other social media platforms, is that your ability to speak to a large audience is totally disaggregated from any kind of sense of authority or credibility. And that's a new phenomenon in media for a variety of reasons. But to your point, with Cronkite, your access to audience was directly correlated with some sense of kind of diligence or process. Now you can command an audience of 100 million people and not have had any of that process. Now, I think the wrong way to answer that question is to say we're going to create a new whitelist where credible journalists who go through the proper schools will enter into accreditation and be able to speak to the Facebook masses. But Google actually solved part of this problem originally, which is, Google has a theory of authority.
Yes.
And it's not perfect, as we've all learned, and it has its own challenges. But actually, I think really what we need is simply something that blends the way that Google approaches authority, which is a very internet-based way that different web pages vote for each other that's decentralized, with the way that Facebook approaches audience, which is that you get to reach people based on your popularity. And if you simply brought those two things together, that would be a start. Right now, Facebook, the only criterion you need to meet to reach a large group of people is popularity.
Right. But I guess the difference is Google is the one serving up your menu, where in Facebook it's somebody serving it up. So how do you manage that? And listen, I agree 100% with everything everybody's saying here. I guess my only issue is I get worried when we say the government has to do something about the flow of information. Yeah. So the riddle of if the U.S. government doesn't do something, then foreign governments are going to do something. I don't like that math because I don't like either side of that.
Yeah. I also feel like the government does regulate all sorts of speech on Facebook, much of which we believe, none of us believe that advertisements that are fraudulent should be able to reach a large audience, and they don't. And it's very simple.
Without going on indefinitely, there are people working on the pieces of solutions which are beginning to unite. Mm-hmm. There's something called the Trust Project, which from a news consumer point of view is about, what do I want to see from a news publication if they want me to buy the thing? For example, a code of ethics would be good, like don't make things up. But because things do go wrong, I want to see a corrections policy as well that people are serious about. I was referring to before the whole open brand safety effort. Here's where we got a bunch of companies, TrustMetric, Moat, something called Storyful, which are trying to work together to enlist large numbers of people who might credibly figure out what's going on that's reliable. They're bringing in the International Fact-Checking Network, which is a large network of fact-checkers across the world, managed by the Poynter Institute, who's been doing this kind of thing for years. The idea is that things are actually happening to actually build a network of networks. Here's where people are going to be saying, hey, if you want to put an ad on something that's trustworthy, here's some help doing that kind of thing.
And it is amazing that the president has never, not once, asked the Russian government to cease what they're doing every day inside the United States, creating an unprecedented set of permission systems for foreign governments, not just the Russians and others, to come into the U.S. Because there is going to have to be some kind of chemical weapons ban treaty, right, for this kind of activity, in the future. But the second thing is bots, right? I mean, why are bots legal? And they are fraudulent activity. I mean, this is a much bigger problem with Twitter than it is with YouTube and with Google and Facebook. But 55% of Donald Trump's followers are fake. right? And millions of them are bots, and we know this, right? This is a known thing. Why is that something that we allow platforms to encourage fraudulent activity? Should bots have to register in some ways and have a disclaimer that they're actually not a person, right? That they're committing fraud by representing themselves as people. There are things that we can think about, right, that will be, I think, fair-minded, right, in trying to rein this thing in. But my whole point as somebody who's been in politics for a long time is that if the community here, and Facebook, Twitter, and Google don't come up with good ideas, right, then bad things could be imposed, and that's what we want to avoid, I think.
Kind of in the theme of really what we can be doing, a lot of this is about setting trusted metrics, rating things, elevating the good over the bad. But a question I kind of put to all of you, and whoever wants to take it first, fight for it. But who decides that ultimately? Because all of these groups are, to some extent, they have skin in the game that are involved in this so far. So who gets to choose who is trusted?
It's not as straightforward as we tend to think. So I think I probably came to it thinking you earn trust by being factually accurate. And I left, having read a bunch of the social science around this, thinking that it's actually the exact opposite. That you don't get an opportunity to deliver facts or to deliver information unless you already have trust. And that trust isn't actually about factuality, but it's about a sense of whether someone has your back, has your best interests at heart. And so if you invert that, it suggests a different way out, which is complementary to what Craig's talking about, which is let's definitely make sure that news is factual, that there is incentives to be factual and to abide by this code. But let's also approach this project from a point of view of why might people not be trusting media? And maybe it's because, if we're honest, media doesn't actually care about their lives in large parts. There's an amazing sort of graph of, in Maine, where I grew up, towns that voted for Trump versus towns that voted for Clinton, overlaid with mentions in local press. And it's this direct correlation where the more blue, the more Clinton-oriented the town was, the more it got covered in the local press. So no wonder that there's a whole bunch of people who feel left out of the conversation, because they literally are. And if we don't solve those problems so that people actually feel like the media sources that they're reading have their best interests at heart, I don't think there's any hope for then providing them with facts or information that gets through. And so just final point, which is, to me, the project in front of us is partly this project of platforms and distribution and partly this project of validation, but it's also like building a bridge from these processes for uncovering truth and journalism and actually getting to the bottom of the matter to what we know about how people actually internalize information, which is through stories and through emotion and through these trust relationships. Somehow, as a society, we need to go from here to here, and we need these structures that get us from point A to point B. And I don't think we have them fully right now. And so to me, it's all of the above.
Part of this is self-policing in that, Forbes.com is the largest business news website in the world. It's because people intuitively know that if you read something that says Forbes, it means it's credible. It doesn't mean, again, that we don't make mistakes, but it does mean we have a system where if somebody's posting something and it's wrong, we correct it, or we rip it down, and then we repost it, correct it, and so people know that they can trust us, just like, it's the same reason, and all the big brands. So to have an economically viable media company, you have to have that. The two issues we have are, one, you have lots of media sources that are not trying to be economically viable. They're trying to be politically influential, and maybe they're funded for that, but they don't have to build credibility because that's not their purpose. So that's an issue. Ultimately, Trump's kind of war on the most destructive thing he does in terms of First Amendment issues is he undermines, and we were just talking about before this session about NBC News, and Trump is doing a number on them, and The issue is, and it doesn't mean NBC News doesn't make mistakes, but NBC News is the kind of organization that should be trusted because even if they get it wrong, they will fix it. And the issue that if some media organization gets something wrong and then it's labeled fake news by influential people, that's dangerous because then you're conditioned not to trust anybody because you think there's an agenda as opposed to credible news organizations that just happen to make mistakes but have systems to correct mistakes versus they don't care if they make mistakes because they know what they want to write.
You know, our system for determining truth has turned on itself, and unless we, can find a way to rebuild that immune system, my fear is that, you sort of people throw up their hands and say, I have no idea what's true. Right. I'm just going to get on with life.
This is an active research area which is just beginning. Where it ends, I don't really know because, people will use AI techniques to detect some of this. At the end of this process, sometimes one speculates, speaking as a nerd, one speculates that it might actually involve full artificial intelligence, in which case I, for one, welcome our new machine overlords. But no one knows that range of things. To repeat, what a classified ad site has to detect is a much easier problem, while still really hard, than what Facebook or Google has to deal with. So give them some credit. This is just the very beginning of a long journey, to use that pretty accurately. And the idea is to find people to work together who can together solve this kind of thing while keeping each other safe.
And to that end, what is how much would transparency from the social networks into what they actually do know help in this situation? Simon, thoughts on that?
Look, I think we're all learning. We don't know. There's a lot we don't know, and I think they have to make decisions as publicly regulated companies, right? The companies that are public companies to have maximum disclosure. Look, I think this is a C-suite. My bottom line for all of you in this room who are all part of the broader ecosystem is that this just can't be on the periphery. Just in the way that privacy and data privacy can't be on the periphery of a company anymore, this stuff can't be either, right? And that everyone has a role to play to keep the internet healthy. And I think Facebook and Google in particular have a real opportunity to demonstrate that they are taking this super seriously and doing everything they possibly can. Not releasing the ads that we know were paid for by the Russian government is not a great example of that, right? They were paid in rubles, right? They weren't paid in dollars. We know they were bought in Russia. They've admitted they were Russian ads that were used to influence the American election. Why not release the ads? And I think it's an unsustainable position. So I do think you're seeing Facebook sort of stumble through this early stage. I think they are taking it very seriously now. There's no question about that. But that, as Craig pointed out, if the internet is in year 23, if it's in early middle age, whatever it is, this is a bumpy period, and that we all have an obligation to make sure this thing that's one of the greatest inventions in human history comes out the other side of this stronger and better, right, than it is. But we won't get there unless everybody helps, because and I think we have to help encourage Facebook to continue to be maximally transparent.
Default position is transparency. Two limitations. One is you say the wrong thing, and you could face serious liability issues. But also, if you're a little too transparent about the algorithms you use or some of the criteria you use, then you actually tell people how to game your system. Right. So it's self-defeating. About 10 years ago, my security folks showed me something that I had said that turned up immediately in a Black Hat discussion board. That's the first and only time they've had to spank me. Usually it's the lawyers, and forever it's the lawyers. But liability and letting people know what they can do to game the system is a problem. There's a related problem is that they may disclose how things work to people in government, but then they can expect that to be leaked to bad actors.
I guess how much do the bad actors already know, though, I guess is the question that we're already seeing out there.
Well, some things they know pretty universally, like they expect you to be looking for keyword matching, telling people that's nothing new, looking for specific IP addresses or IP address ranges. They knew these were techniques going back 10 years or so, and so those are obvious things which news to no one, but more advanced techniques I deliberately avoid knowing anything about because I don't want to get another spanking.
People build stuff to make things better, and so I hope folks in this room join in that.